The sovereign borders of human consciousness have long been considered the final sanctuary of individual liberty. Yet, buried within the classified archives of the 20th century lies a documented architecture of subversion, a systematic, state-sponsored initiative designed to breach, dismantle, and reconstruct the human mind. For decades, rumors surrounding the CIA's psychological warfare programs were dismissed as paranoid conspiracy. However, the release of over 1,200 previously classified documents by the National Security Archive in late 2024 has irrevocably shattered that deniability. Arriving exactly 70 years after the United States secured domestic manufacturing capabilities for tonnage quantities of LSD, this massive intelligence dump provides a forensic accounting of Project MKUltra. The documents reveal a sprawling, terrifying apparatus of clandestine safe houses, unwitting experimentation, induced amnesia, acoustic weaponry, and early neurotelemetry. This dossier exhaustively analyzes these newly declassified records, tracing the lineage of cognitive warfare. Prepare to question everything you thought you knew. The psychological warfare initiatives of the Central Intelligence Agency were not born in a vacuum. They were a frantic, defensive reaction to the geopolitical anxieties of the Cold War and the Korean conflict. The prevailing orthodoxy in Washington during the late 1940s and early 1950s was characterized by an existential dread of Soviet and Sino-Communist ideological expansion. This anxiety reached a fever pitch with reports that hostile forces, particularly North Korean and Chinese operatives, were utilizing advanced, esoteric brainwashing techniques to extract confessions from United States prisoners of war. Public spectacles, such as the vacant, glassy-eyed confessions of high-ranking officials and religious figures like Cardinal Joseph Manchenti during Eastern Bloc show trials, convinced the nascent U.S. intelligence community that the Soviet Union had unlocked the dark secrets of the human psyche. This catalyzed a rapid response paradigm within the CIA. The agency was terrified of an interrogation gap, a fear that American operatives caught behind the Iron Curtain would be systematically broken, their minds laid bare to enemy intelligence, while the U.S. had no reciprocal capability. The primary directive, initially formalized under Project Bluebird in 1950 and subsequently expanded as Project Artichoke in August 1951, was articulated in a stark, terrifying mandate. The CIA sought to determine if an individual could be controlled to the point where they would perform acts of sabotage or assassination against their will, overriding fundamental laws of nature such as self-preservation. It was a quest to create the ultimate weapon, a programmable human asset, entirely compliant, stripped of free will, and capable of operating without conscious memory of their actions. The operationalization of this chilling directive is heavily detailed in the April 1950 plan approved by the Director of Central Intelligence, DCI, preserved in the recent National Security Archive declassification as Document 2. This memorandum definitively established specialized interrogation teams explicitly tasked to utilize the polygraph, drugs, and hypnotism to attain the greatest results in interrogation techniques. The objective transcended mere information extraction. The goal was to dismantle the psychological defenses of the subject entirely, creating a compliant vessel. The documents explicitly outline that each field team was to be composed of exactly 3 persons: a doctor psychiatrist, a polygraph hypnotist, and a technician. This specific trinity of disciplines underscored the agency's belief that breaking a human mind required a synchronized assault on the subject's neurochemistry, psychological framework, and physiological stress responses. By 1951, the CIA was already operating far beyond its domestic borders, coordinating with foreign intelligence officials to exchange research on individual mind control, effectively establishing a covert international consensus on the necessity of psychological experimentation. The horrifying efficacy of these early programs is detailed in Document 6, a memorandum dated July 14, 1952, submitted by the CIA Security Office to the DCI. The document reports on the successful application of artichoke interrogation methods on Russian agents suspected of being doubled. Operating under the guise of a routine psychiatric medical evaluation, intelligence officers and medical staff orchestrated a precise chemical and hypnotic assault on the subjects. The methodology was as precise as it was devastating. Handlers utilized heavy dosages of sodium pentothal, a potent fast-acting sedative barbiturate, coupled with the stimulant disoxin, a powerful methamphetamine. This pharmacological paradox was ingeniously cruel. By simultaneously suppressing higher executive functions with a barbiturate while hyperstimulating the central nervous system with a methamphetamine, the subjects were thrust into a state of profound psychological regression, disorientation, and hypervulnerability. The pentothal lowered their conscious defenses, making them pliant, while the methamphetamine forced them into a state of manic, unavoidable wakefulness and vocalization. They could not remain silent, and they could not defend their own secrets. Once the subject was chemically destabilized to this degree, the interrogators applied advanced hypnotic techniques to breach the subconscious. The success of the operation was measured not only by the raw intelligence extracted, but by the psychological aftermath. The document casually, almost clinically, notes that the interrogation induced regression and a subsequent total amnesia produced by post-hypnotic suggestion. The subjects would awaken with no memory of the profound violations they had endured, their minds wiped clean of the interrogation event to preserve operational security. The interrogators reported back to the DCY that the operations were entirely successful and demonstrated conclusively the effectiveness of the combined chemical hypnotic technique in such cases. Yet, despite these harrowing initial successes, the grand architect of the program, Sidney Gottlieb, would later admit in a 1975 deposition that the program ultimately experienced as many failures as successes and was probably not a high payoff program. This grim admission underscores the reality that thousands of lives were ruined in a desperate, deeply flawed pursuit of an unattainable science fiction fantasy. To truly understand the depths the intelligence community was willing to sink to, and to support our continued deep dives into declassified history, please consider subscribing to the channel right now. As the geopolitical stakes of the Cold War intensified, Project MKUltra officially subsumed Artichoke in 1953. Under the direction of Sidney Gottlieb, a brilliant but deeply unorthodox chemist operating as the chief of the chemical division of the Office of Technical Service, OTS, the CIA's appetite for psychoactive compounds expanded exponentially. Gottlieb was a visionary of psychological destruction. He identified lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD-25, as the supreme catalyst for psychological deconstruction. Unlike the crude sledgehammer of barbiturates, LSD offered a molecular scalpel capable of fundamentally rewriting a subject's perception of reality, fracturing their ego, and inducing experimental psychosis. Initially, the CIA's biochemical ambitions were heavily constrained by supply chain issues. The agency relied entirely on the Swiss pharmaceutical firm Sandoz, the birthplace of LSD, where Albert Hofmann had first synthesized the compound. In a bid for total control, the CIA attempted to corner the global market by securing an exclusive agreement for Sandoz's entire output. The intelligence community feared a scenario where the Soviets could mass-produce LSD to spray over American cities or lace the water supplies of military installations, inducing mass panic and tactical paralysis. However, geopolitical anxieties and the strategic vulnerability of relying on a foreign supply chain, even a neutral one like Switzerland, prompted the CIA to seek a robust, covert domestic alternative. In late 1954, the Indianapolis-based pharmaceutical giant Eli Lilly and Company achieved a monumental biochemical breakthrough that fundamentally altered the trajectory of MKUltra. With highly covert CIA coordination and massive financial backing laundered through front organizations, Eli Lilly researchers successfully synthesized LSD independently. Crucially, they bypassed the need for the scarce, hard-to-grow ergot fungus that had previously been the bottleneck for global production. The Eli Lilly team established a fully synthetic, highly scalable production method involving a complex 12 to 15-step process, utilizing precursor chemicals readily available on the open commercial market. The scale of this operation was unprecedented in the annals of clandestine chemistry. An internal CIA memorandum dispatched to DCI Allen Dulles optimistically reported that the Eli Lilly breakthrough meant the United States government would soon have access to tonnage quantities of LSD. To comprehend the sheer terror of this metric, one must consider the extreme potency of the compound. LSD is active in the human brain at microscopic doses, measured in micrograms, millionths of a gram. A standard recreational dose is merely 100 micrograms. A single kilogram of LSD contains approximately 10 million standard doses. The acquisition of tonnage quantities, thousands of kilograms, indicates a paradigm shift. The CIA and allied military branches were no longer just seeking a truth serum for individual interrogations. They were aggressively preparing a strategic chemical stockpile sufficient to theoretically dose the entire global population multiple times over, viewing LSD as a wide-area weapon of mass psychological disruption. The relentless push to operationalize these highly unpredictable compounds resulted in immediate, fatal casualties within the government's own ranks, demonstrating a chilling, systemic disregard for human life and informed consent. The most infamous tragedy occurred in 1953, involving Frank Olson, a brilliant civilian research chemist and aerosol specialist working for the Army's Special Operations Division, SOD, at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Olson was privy to the darkest secrets of the U.S. biological weapons program. In November of that year, he attended a joint CIA-SOD retreat at a cabin in Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. Without his knowledge or consent, Sidney Gottlieb laced Olson's after-dinner glass of Cointreau with a massive dose of LSD to test the drug's efficacy on an unwitting, highly cleared official. The experiment was a catastrophic failure. Olson experienced a severe, protracted psychological breakdown characterized by intense paranoia, existential dread, and an inability to distinguish reality from delusion. For days, he languished in a state of terror, convinced he had committed grave sins and that his mind was permanently broken. A week later, while ostensibly under the psychiatric care of CIA-cleared physician Harold Abramson in New York City, Olson plunged to his death from the 10th floor window of the Hotel Statler. While officially ruled a suicide for decades, the circumstances surrounding his death have fueled ongoing investigations. The revelation of the LSD dosing decades later led his family to exhume his body, uncovering forensic evidence suggesting a blow to the head prior to the fall, leading to persistent accusations of a deliberate assassination by the CIA to silence a compromised asset who knew too much about America's biological warfare capabilities. Similarly, the ruthless drive to establish psychoactive, lethal thresholds led to the death of Harold Blower, a professional tennis player who voluntarily checked into the New York State Psychiatric Institute, seeking treatment for clinical depression. He believed he was receiving therapeutic care. Instead, under a covert military contract designed to evaluate the potential of chemical weapons for the Chemical Corps, Blower was unwittingly injected with a massive, fatal dose of MDA, a synthetic mescaline derivative. These fatalities did not cause the CIA to halt the MKUltra program. Instead, they recognized the inherent dangers of dosing high-profile individuals or highly cleared scientists. The program was driven further underground, migrating its testing protocols away from elite echelons and deliberately targeting marginalized, vulnerable populations, people who could not fight back, who lacked legal recourse, and whose testimonies could be easily discredited. Document 13 from the newly released 2024 archive provides grim proof of this pivot. The document shows Sidney Gottlieb signing off on a 1956 project to evaluate the effects of large doses of LSD-25 in normal human volunteers. The volunteers were federal prisoners incarcerated at the penitentiary in Atlanta, subjects who were lured with promises of reduced sentences or small amounts of cash, effectively nullifying any concept of genuine informed consent. As MKUltra progressed, the chemical division recognized a critical flaw in their methodology. Controlled clinical settings, sterile laboratories, and prison wards were inadequate for testing the true operational efficacy of mind-altering drugs. An intelligence officer in the field would not be administering a truth serum in a hospital bed. They would be doing it in bars, hotel rooms, and hostile environments. This realization led to the establishment of covert SAFEHOUSES, sophisticated observation laboratories disguised as civilian residences, brothels, and eventually medical annexes. The explicit objective was to observe the effects of LSD and other chemical agents on unsuspecting individuals in dynamic, uncontrolled, real-world environments, charting the unpredictable variables of human behavior under extreme, chemically induced duress. To execute this deeply cynical phase of MKUltra, Sidney Gottlieb required an operator devoid of scientific ethics or moral squeamishness. He enlisted George Hunter White, a seasoned, uncompromising, and notoriously brutal investigator for the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. White was no stranger to the dark arts of intelligence. He had previously worked on truth drug development for the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, during World War II, bringing a hardened, street-level ruthlessness to Gottlieb's academic team. White, assuming the bohemian pseudonym Morgan Hall, established and managed deeply covert SAFEHOUSES in New York City, initially in Greenwich Village, and, most notoriously, at 225 Chestnut Street in San Francisco. Operation Midnight Climax represented the total, unequivocal abandonment of scientific ethics, domestic laws, and basic human decency. White meticulously oversaw the elaborate interior decoration of the San Francisco safe house, intentionally transforming it into a psychological trap designed to evoke glamour, illicit sex, and seduction. He hung pictures of French can-can dancers, draped lush, heavy red curtains over the windows to block out the outside world, and framed Toulouse-Lautrec posters with black silk mats. It was a meticulously crafted stage set for psychological destruction. He then hired a Berkeley engineering student to install a sophisticated array of surveillance equipment. A two-way mirror was seamlessly integrated into the bedroom wall, while state-of-the-art audio recording and bugging equipment was wired throughout the premises, feeding directly into an observation post. Prostitutes, compensated directly with CIA cash and implicit promises of immunity from federal law enforcement, a vital currency for sex workers in the 1950s, were employed to lure unsuspecting men from local bars back to the apartment. Once inside, the men were surreptitiously dosed with LSD or other MKUltra compounds, typically slipped into their martinis or other alcoholic beverages by the sex workers. As the drugs took hold, inducing terror, confusion, and profound hallucinations, George Hunter White would sit behind the two-way mirror in the darkened observation room. Frequently consuming martinis himself, he would observe, record, and coldly catalog the drug-induced behaviors, the resulting cognitive panic, and the subsequent sexual encounters of the unwitting subjects. The project yielded massive amounts of data on the intersection of sex, pharmacology, and vulnerability, but its methodology was fundamentally criminal. In a 1983 deposition, Gottlieb admitted that the financial logistics of Operation Midnight Climax were practically lawless. It was impossible to require receipts or accurate accounting for the funds distributed to sex workers and informants due to the highly unorthodox nature of these activities. The CIA was effectively running a federally funded drug and prostitution ring to observe the collapse of the human mind. While George Hunter White commanded the urban underworld, the architects of MKUltra simultaneously recognized the need for legitimate, high-level clinical research. They systematically infiltrated the highest echelons of academic medicine to co-opt the nation's best scientific minds. To circumvent oversight, the CIA routinely utilized philanthropic organizations as cutouts to launder research funds to prestigious universities, masking the true origin and purpose of the grants. Document 11 explicitly details how the CIA weaponized the Geschichter Fund for Medical Research. Run by Dr. Charles Geschichter, a prominent pathologist, the fund served as a primary, heavily utilized conduit for black budget money. The CIA secretly funneled a staggering $375,000 toward the construction of a new medical facility, the Lawrence C. Gorman Diagnostic Building, the Gorman Annex, at Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C. The terms of this architectural investment were explicitly, terrifyingly transactional. In exchange for the construction funding, Geschichter provided the CIA with unfettered, off-the-books access to 1/6 of the entire new hospital wing. The agency had effectively purchased a covert hospital safe house embedded within a fully functioning, highly respected domestic medical institution. Crucially, the agreement stipulated that the hospital would provide human patients and volunteers for experimental use and offer excellent professional cover for CIA biochemical personnel operating within the facility. Patients seeking standard medical care were utterly unaware that the doctors treating them might be intelligence operatives, testing weaponized compounds. A similarly dark infiltration occurred at Cornell University Medical College. The Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology was established as a sophisticated front organization by prominent neurologist Harold Wolff. Wolff utilized substantial CIA grant money to finance sweeping research into interrogation, coercion, and torture methods. The ethical boundaries were non-existent. His team even investigated a cohort of 100 Chinese refugees, ostensibly studying human ecology, but with the explicit goal of identifying vulnerabilities to mold them into compliant, brainwashed CIA agents. However, by 1963, internal pushback began to mount as the sheer recklessness of the program became undeniable to internal auditors. The CIA's Inspector General, John Ehrman, issued a scathing internal report, now declassified as Document 16, stating unequivocally that the program's structure and operational controls need strengthening. Ehrman and Deputy Director Marshall Carter vehemently opposed the ongoing unwitting testing of American citizens on domestic soil, viewing it as a massive liability. However, they faced fierce opposition from Richard Helms, the architect of MKUltra's administrative structure, and Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb argued forcefully that controlled testing cannot be depended upon for accurate results, insisting that the survival of the free world depended on the agency's ability to operate in the ethical shadows. The battle lines within the agency were drawn, but the experimentation continued. Of all the myriad sub-projects operating under the sprawling MKUltra umbrella, Sub-Project 68 stands out in the historical record as the most devastating, prolonged, and systematic application of psychiatric violence on record. It represents the absolute nadir of medical ethics, where the oath to do no harm was inverted into a methodology of deliberate psychological annihilation. The experiments were conducted by Dr. Donald Ewen Cameron, a towering, immensely powerful figure in global psychiatry. Cameron was not a fringe scientist. He served simultaneously as the president of the American Psychiatric Association, the Canadian Psychiatric Association, and the World Psychiatric Association. His prestige provided an impenetrable shield of legitimacy to his atrocities. From 1957 to 1964, operating out of the Allan Memorial Institute, a Gothic mansion converted into a psychiatric facility at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, Cameron subjected his patients to a horrific regimen. Crucially, these were not enemy combatants or hardened spies. They were ordinary citizens seeking treatment for minor, deeply manageable ailments, such as mild postpartum depression, anxiety, or marital stress. They were subjected to a process designed to entirely erase their existing personalities and rebuild them from a blank, compliant psychological slate. Cameron's methodology, deeply admired, heavily subsidized, and meticulously monitored by the CIA via cutout grants, was divided into two distinct, unyieldingly brutal phases: depatterning and psychic driving. The depatterning phase sought the total, foundational destruction of the patient's memory, ego, and identity. Cameron believed that mental illness was a learned behavior that needed to be literally shocked and chemically wiped out of the brain. Patients were subjected to massive paralyzing doses of hallucinogens, including LSD, paralytic drugs like curare to prevent them from fighting back, and incredibly powerful antipsychotics like thorazine to induce a state of profound lethargy. This relentless pharmacological assault was accompanied by intensive, weaponized electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, Standard ECT involved a single shock, but Cameron utilized the Page-Russell method, administering immense voltages and frequencies vastly exceeding standard medical protocols. He often applied these violent shocks multiple times a day, every day for weeks on end, physically damaging the brain's temporal lobes to wipe out memory storage. To further isolate the psyche and shatter the mind's connection to physical reality, patients were placed into chemically induced artificial comas, using massive regimens of barbiturates, or sealed in the grid room, a sensory deprivation chamber designed to eliminate all visual and auditory input, accelerating the psychological breakdown. During these extended periods of profound paralysis and sensory void, Cameron initiated the psychic driving phase. Having wiped the slate blank, he attempted to reprogram the mind. Audio recorders were placed under the patient's pillows, or, in the most disturbing instances, inside modified football helmets strapped tightly and inescapably to their heads. A repetitive audio message, crafted explicitly by Cameron to break down the patient's remaining defenses, "You are a bad mother," "Your husband hates you," or install new behavioral directives, was played on a continuous, inescapable loop for up to 16 hours a day while the subjects were comatose or semi-conscious. Some patients were forced to listen to a single phrase up to 500,000 times. The consequences for the victims were uniformly catastrophic. Patients emerged from the Allan Memorial Institute with severe, profound retrograde amnesia. The treatments did not cure their anxiety. It destroyed their humanity. Many entirely forgot their spouses, their children, and how to perform basic human functions, such as walking, feeding themselves, or using the bathroom. They were reduced to an infantile state. Some patients, subjected to the targeted erasure of their linguistic centers via localized electroshock, entirely forgot how to speak their native languages, requiring years of intensive therapy, merely to relearn how to communicate. The dark legacy of the Allan Memorial Institute experiments did not fade with Cameron's death. Instead, it has sparked protracted, agonizing, and highly complex legal battles that span decades and cross international borders. In a historic turning point in July 2025, culminating in massive operational proceedings, slated throughout 2026, the Superior Court of Quebec officially authorized a massive, unprecedented class action lawsuit against the Canadian government, the Royal Victoria Hospital, and McGill University. The lawsuit argues that the Canadian government was deeply complicit, actively funding Cameron's work, while knowing the CIA was the ultimate beneficiary of the torture data. The suit, representing the surviving patients, their immediate families, and their estates, demands comprehensive compensation for the profound physical, psychological, and generational harm inflicted. The trauma did not just break the patients, it destroyed families, echoing through the generations of children raised by parents whose minds had been fundamentally shattered by the state. The human toll is meticulously documented in harrowing, heartbreaking testimonies from the few remaining survivors who have spent their lives fighting for accountability. Lana Jean Ponting, who was hospitalized at the Institute as a teenager, merely for troublesome adolescent behavior and running away from home, provided devastating testimony during the lawsuit's authorization hearings. She was subjected to the full horrors of the sleep room and massive electroshock. "I was drugged up so bad, I can't remember half of what they did to me," Ponting stated to the court, now approaching 84 years old, her voice trembling with decades of suppressed trauma. The abuse transcended psychological and psychiatric boundaries into profound, violent, physical violation. In a moment that stunned the courtroom, Ponting revealed the ultimate depth of her victimization. "I bore a son when I was at the Allan Memorial, and I got pregnant without ever knowing who the father was." The implication of systemic sexual assault upon comatose, paralyzed patients under the guise of state-funded psychiatric research is a horror almost beyond comprehension. Another deeply tragic and highly publicized case involved Velma Val Orlikow, the wife of David Orlikow, a prominent Canadian member of Parliament. She sought treatment for minor depression following the birth of her child and was subjected to massive LSD regimens and extensive psychic driving by Cameron. Her mind was permanently altered, rendering her incapable of reading or functioning normally for the rest of her life. During Sidney Gottlieb's 1983 deposition for the Orlikow civil suit, a staggering, infuriating transcript released as Document 20 in the recent NSA declassification, the former MKUltra chief feigned total ignorance of the harm. Despite funding Cameron, reviewing his reports on depatterning, and reading the protocols of psychic driving, Gottlieb testified under oath that he had no recollection of any negative effects, an act of historical perjury that highlights the institutional arrogance of the intelligence apparatus. If you believe that institutional accountability matters, and you want to follow our ongoing, real-time coverage of these vital 2026 lawsuits, hit the subscribe button now to join the community. While the chemical division of MKUltra focused heavily on pharmacological manipulation, the CIA and allied military branches recognized that drugs were messy, unpredictable, and physically debilitating. They aggressively pursued non-chemical vectors for mind control, pushing the absolute boundaries of psychological profiling, advanced physics, and early neurobiology into the realm of dark, dystopian science fiction. Perhaps one of the most operationally successful, widely utilized, yet deeply unsettling legacies of MKUltra was the Personality Assessment System, PAS, developed by the program's resident chief psychologist, John Gittinger. Gittinger was tasked with finding a way to identify the perfect pliant subject without having to dose them first. Gittinger hypothesized that standard intelligence tests, specifically the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, WAIs, could be reverse engineered and utilized not just to measure IQ, but to map the fundamental underlying architecture of human personality and vulnerability. By analyzing the specific subtest scores, for instance, observing how a person processed digit spans versus their performance on block designs, Gittinger believed he was peering into the source code of their psyche. He categorized individuals along highly specific psychological axes, such as externalizer-internalizer, how they sought validation, confused-rigid, how they handled stress, and unacceptable-acceptable, their propensity for antisocial behavior. He believed this complex mathematical profile could accurately predict an individual's susceptibility to hypnosis, their capacity for learning under duress, and most importantly, for the CIA, their fundamental vulnerability to specific types of coercion and blackmail. The CIA found the PAS to be so incredibly effective and insightful that it rapidly transitioned from an experimental MKUltra sub-project to a standard, mandatory tool across the intelligence community. It was used for assessing the vulnerabilities of foreign agents, debriefing defectors, and even played a critical role in advising the White House. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, Gittinger's PAS was used to construct Nikita Khrushchev's psychological profile directly influencing President Kennedy's negotiation strategies. While Gittinger mapped the mind, other sub-projects sought to physically disable it without leaving a trace. MKUltra. Sub-Project 54 represents one of the most enigmatic, physically aggressive, and terrifying components of the CIA's research portfolio. Originally initiated under a grant by the Office of Naval Research, the project heavily investigated the fluid dynamics of brain concussions before being fully absorbed directly into the MKUltra black budget apparatus. The stated operational goal of Sub-Project 54 was a physicist's nightmare: to achieve a perfect concussion. Declassified Senate testimony and fragmented project files reveal that researchers were explicitly tasked with developing techniques to induce immediate, debilitating brain concussions and sweeping retrograde amnesia without utilizing any physical blunt force, and crucially, without leaving any detectable physical marks, bruising, or trauma on the victim. It was the pursuit of an invisible, untraceable weapon. To achieve this, the CIA explored the weaponization of acoustic energy. Scientists explored the use of sub-aural frequency blasts, infrasound, and highly concentrated, directed sound waves aimed directly at the cranium. The theoretical framework suggested that specific, highly pressurized acoustic frequencies operating entirely below the threshold of human hearing could resonate with the cerebrospinal fluid, physically scrambling neural pathways and instantaneously erasing short-term memory before the target even registered an attack had occurred. It was designed to neutralize whistleblowers, agents, or targets in public without firing a shot. If Sub-Project 54 sought to mechanically erase memory via acoustic physics, MKUltra Sub-Project 119 sought to overwrite and control it entirely via electronics. This sub-project represents the true origin point of modern neurowarfare. Declassified Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. Logs and internal project summaries categorize Sub-Project 119 explicitly and unabashedly under the headings of biological process control and electronic mind control. This sub-project fundamentally moved beyond the messy, unpredictable variables of LSD and behavioral psychology, delving directly into the highly classified, nascent field of biomedical human telemetry. Documents outline intense, highly funded early efforts to develop physical brain implants and microscopic biotelemetric devices. The goal was twofold: to create devices capable of transmitting a subject's physiological data remotely, heart rate, adrenaline levels, brain waves, to an observation post, and conversely, to create receivers capable of picking up external electronic signals. These signals would be designed to artificially stimulate specific, targeted neuron pathways using directed energy lasers, microwaves, and precisely tuned electromagnetics. By attempting to bypass the sensory organs and input commands directly into the cortex, Sub-Project 119 laid the grim, undeniable foundation for modern neurotechnology, proving that the state's desire to hack the human brain electronically predates the silicon microchip by decades. The institutional mandate to manipulate the human mind, to extract truth by force, and to breach the cognitive sanctum did not evaporate with the official termination of MKUltra in 1973 following the Church Committee hearings. Decades later, the immense geopolitical trauma of the September 11th attacks resurrected the exact same operational desires, the exact same ethical compromises, and the exact same panic within the CIA's Office of Medical Services, OMS. A heavily redacted, profoundly disturbing 90-page secret history, declassified and released in 2018 following a protracted, bitter Freedom of Information Act lawsuit by the ACLU, revealed the existence of a highly classified post-9/11 initiative known as Project Medication. The historical rhyming with artichoke is undeniable and terrifying. Between 2002 and 2007, the CIA was heavily engaged in the War on Terror. However, as the agency struggled with the efficacy, the public relations fallout, and the increasingly terrible political optics of physical, enhanced interrogation techniques such as waterboarding, sleep deprivation, and stress positions, agency medical professionals began actively hunting for a cleaner, chemical solution. They were searching for a modern, sanitized truth serum to force hardened, resistant terror suspects to surrender actionable intelligence in ticking time bomb scenarios. The declassified OMS report explicitly states that high-ranking CIA doctors specifically requested and reviewed the old, thoroughly discredited records of the MKUltra program. They dusted off Sidney Gottlieb's failures. They also reviewed data regarding Soviet drug experiments from the Cold War, desperately searching for a viable chemical agent that could reliably bypass conscious resistance and induce compliance without causing permanent, catastrophic brain damage or lethal overdose. After extensive pharmacological review, they identified a powerful, fast-acting psychoactive sedative called Versed, the brand name for midazolam. Versed is a benzodiazepine frequently prescribed in legitimate medical settings to reduce severe pre-surgical anxiety and induce temporary amnesia during procedures. The OMS physicians theorized that it was the ideal candidate to induce absolute compliance and a state of profound, learned helplessness in uncooperative detainees at black sites. The Office of Medical Services enthusiastically concluded in their internal memos that chemically dosing prisoners with high levels of Versed to break their will before interrogation was possibly worth a try. It was a stunning abdication of medical ethics, an echo of the 1950s justification that the ends justify the pharmacological means. Ultimately, Project Medication was shelved, but the reasoning is crucial. It was not terminated out of an ethical awakening regarding the profound violation of medical oaths or human rights. It was abandoned entirely out of bureaucratic fatigue and legal cowardice. The CIA's counterterrorism team, having already spent agonizing months securing dubious legal memos and Department of Justice authorization for severe physical torture methodologies, decided they simply did not want to raise another issue with the Department of Justice regarding the incredibly murky, volatile legalities of chemical mind control. The desire to break the mind remained entirely intact. It was only the paperwork that stopped it. The primitive tools of the 1950s, the spiked martinis served in brothels, the crude, flesh-burning electroshock machines of Ewen Cameron, the subterranean safe houses dripping with paranoia, have evolved. They belong to a bygone era of brute force experimentation. However, the contemporary frontier of mind control has not disappeared. It has merely migrated. It has transitioned from the clandestine, mold-ridden laboratories of the CIA to the sleek, well-funded, publicly celebrated research sectors of the modern military-industrial complex and the global commercial technology sector. The intent has been sanitized with the language of innovation, but the core capability remains terrifyingly identical. A profound, heavily cited analysis published by the Harvard Carr Center for Human Rights Policy authored by leading bioethicist Lucas J. Meyer, and titled Mind Control, Past and Future, meticulously and undeniably maps the original, highly classified objectives of the MKUltra program directly onto the latest cutting-edge advancements in brain-computer interface, BCI, technology. The report asserts a chilling, undeniable conclusion. While MKUltra largely failed to achieve precise, sustained, programmable mind control due to the blunt, destructive, and unpredictable nature of chemical drugs, like LSD, modern BC possess the exact operational capabilities that Sidney Gottlieb and Ewen Cameron spent their lives dreaming of achieving. Modern neurotechnology, utilizing high-resolution brain decoding algorithms powered by artificial intelligence and targeted microscopic neural stimulation, allows for the subtle and deeply inconspicuous manipulation of cognitive states. Unlike the barbaric MKUltra protocols, which often shattered the subject's personality entirely, leaving behind a broken, useless shell, advanced BCIs can exert profound influence without causing global neurological damage. By altering dopamine pathways or stimulating specific synaptic nodes, modern tech can render the manipulation practically undetectable to the subject. The individual believes the induced thoughts, desires, or anxieties are entirely their own. The institutional, state-level interest in weaponizing these technologies remains deeply entrenched and abundantly funded. In 2008, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, commissioned a massive forward-looking committee to extensively review the state of neurotechnology. The explicit purpose was to determine if the cognitive states and intentions of persons of interest could be remotely read, decoded, or forcefully controlled. The DIA report explicitly asked the most dangerous question of the 21st century. Is there a reliable, technological method to make the enemy obey our commands? By 2011, the Department of Defense, funneled through the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, funded a highly controversial project at Arizona State University, exploring the neuropsychology of narrative and persuasion. This was not a sociology study, it was a neurowarfare initiative. The researchers explicitly planned to utilize transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, a powerful, non-invasive BCI method based on focused electromagnetic induction capable of penetrating the skull to selectively alter brain functioning in conscious subjects. The goal was to induce or disrupt the neurological processing of complex narratives. They sought to effectively disrupt narratives on a neurological level, quite literally rewiring a constituency's perception of reality, politics, or religion to perfectly align with government intentions. It is the ultimate evolution of psychic driving, achieved without the need for a football helmet or a coma. Furthermore, the threat matrix has exponentially expanded beyond the military into the civilian sphere. The Harvard analysis heavily highlights the current implementation of commercial BCI wearables, such as biometric headbands, utilized in specific Chinese educational settings. These devices are deployed to decode, monitor, and report the cognitive states, attention levels, and emotional reactions of young students in real time to centralized databases, establishing a terrifying, normalized precedent for systemic civil rights violations and the total, absolute erosion of mental privacy from childhood. We are entering an era where the architecture of thought is no longer sovereign. The geopolitical climate is fracturing. Tensions echo the anxieties of the early Cold War, and the technology to interface directly, silently, and powerfully with the human mind is no longer theoretical. It is patentable, deployable, and scalable. The dark ambitions of Project MKUltra were never truly abandoned by the intelligence apparatus. They were merely waiting for the technology to catch up to the terror.